Today's episode has been brought to you by OfferingTree. Because of the support from OfferingTree, this podcast that you're listening to today is free for your ears. So if you have a moment to reach out and check out OfferingTree, you can go to offeringtree.com/Shannon. That will actually give you a discount, and you can check out how they help yoga teachers with online classes, workshops, courses, events, Zoom integration, websites, analytics and data that you need, payments, which include donation and sliding scale. Oh my gosh, there are too many things for me to list quickly. I want to get into today's podcast, but I just wanted to say how thrilled we are that they are bringing this podcast today to you. So hello and welcome. If you're new here, this is the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, and I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Canadian who's learning more about what it means when you live on Turtle Island, on Indigenous land, because all of my ancestors came here as immigrants from Ireland, England, Scotland, and Germany. And I've been doing some research into my roots and my family tree. And right now, this podcast is coming to you from Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga land. And I think it's also super important as we research our own roots that we look at the roots of the land that we're on. And depending on where you are in the world, you can do this as well. If you go to nativeland.ca, I'll make sure to put a link to that in our show notes. Today, I want to give a very special shout out to my son, Colton, who is now 19. This is unbelievable. He's the middle of the three crows. I'm a mom of three. And Colton recently has been working with his horse, and he's got him trained to drive this small sleigh through the snow. And I'm so grateful that Colton's cousin, Terry, took a video. Colton's not big into photos, videos, or anything like that. He's definitely not on social media at all. He's more of the driving my horse in a quiet field kind of guy. But I just treasure this video that was sent. I can ask for permission to maybe share it on my Instagram. I think Colton might be okay with that. And Colton and I share a love of horses. I grew up around horses. He has as well, and he works with horses now. And it's just really cool to see him doing that and really loving that. Maybe you're having a listen to this podcast as you are riding your horse or going out to walk with your horse or walking near the neighbor's horses. Shout out to all of those humans who are caring for horses or who grew up with a horse in their life. So like I said, I'm a mom of three. I'm also a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And this podcast was created for you so that each and every week you are connected to information and inspiration that will support you as you build your unique yoga business. And speaking of support, so today's episode is all about supporting you if you are a yoga teacher who is struggling to make income, or if you are a studio owner and you kind of want to check that out. And I also want to tell you about another support idea that just kind of came about because as we've been moving into 2022, if you're listening in real time, we're in January still, we're at the beginning of this year. It's been a little rocky for some of our yoga teachers and our studios. And some of you have been reaching out to me and just telling me that you're feeling overwhelmed by things and really isolated. And so I had this idea. I threw it out to our Facebook group first. It's still in the process of becoming something. I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your ideas about it for sure. I wanted to create a supportive group for yoga teachers that would go over maybe 5 to 6 months. And I used to do something like this. I used to host group coaching calls years ago where yoga teachers joined, got group coaching, set clear goals, and then were able to connect to this really supportive group that understands the struggles that yoga teachers face. So I'm thinking of bringing this back, and I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of today's episode. I just need to get a link together. We had a lot of interest in the Facebook group, and I'd like to just get this up and going and started to support you even more. So if you're interested, make sure to check out the show notes. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/256. And if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm on the go, how will I remember this? There's a little chat bubble down at the bottom of our homepage. There's also a place where you can join our email list. That's where we definitely will be telling you about it. Or you can even leave me a voicemail. I love to get voicemails. You can find that also on our homepage. Okay, so let's get into today's episode with Tammy, who actually was a coaching client of mine. She came to yoga in 1997, and today she owns Yoga Sublime Studio and the Sublime School of Yoga in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. So she's a fellow Canadian for anyone who's like, where the heck is Saskatchewan? Tammy's studio is in a building that's over 100 years old. Her and her husband purchased this 6 years ago. She's a registered yoga teacher, continuing education provider with Yoga Alliance, and she teaches meditation, gentle flow, restorative, Hatha, and Yin Yoga with a focus on yoga and meditation for stress reduction, healthy aging, as well as leading a 200-hour yoga teacher training at her studio. Now, a lot has changed for Tammy as a yoga studio owner since we first started talking, since going through COVID, and I'm really excited that you get to hear the updated version where things kind of were going when Tammy was looking at changing her yoga studio model. And we know as yoga entrepreneurs, your business changes. It takes many different forms, and this happens over time. The kind of yoga business you have when you leave your yoga teacher training to what you have now, to what you have possibly in the future, is going to change. And Tammy shows how making a big shift can be, it can be scary as a studio owner, but we really get to learn the nuggets of what made the biggest impact as Tammy was switching from a traditional yoga studio model where she paid teachers and they had class passes to a rental model. This also meant changing to registered sessions. And these two things have made a huge difference in her yoga business. As a result, you're going to hear her talk about how teachers at the studio are now making more money. The studio is making more money, and Tammy's able to do less work. And Tammy's able to focus more on her own yoga marketing instead of marketing for all of the teachers at the studio. And the extra bonus is that you're going to hear her talk about how students are now more committed to attend. I am so grateful to Tammy because she really talks openly about what this experience of this shift with her studio was like, how it impacted her and her life. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview no matter what, no matter if you're a yoga teacher all on your own or a yoga studio owner feeling like you really need to make a change with things. Now, before we dive in and meet Tammy, I want to say a big thank you to OfferingTree because recently I was able to actually use this when I created a workshop online. And you know what it's like, connected yoga teachers. You have so many things in your brain and so many things to do when you put an offering together. The last thing that you want to be worried about is back and forth emails or how am I going to get people to register online and pay, and what if their payment is different, and Can they get an automatic email right away to say, yes, you're registered, or a reminder email to say, don't forget to show up because you're registered? And I love that OfferingTree also has a system that allows you to put in place discounts, tiered and donation-based pricing, where you can really decide, okay, is this going to be this set price, or will people have some flexibility with the price? The other thing I really appreciate is that if you're ever needing a feature that they don't have, you can reach out to them and say, hey, here's something that I need. I know that's what happened when yoga teachers were saying, hey, we're doing this thing that we need different tiers of pricing, or we need people to be able to pay a donation. And great news, if you're checking out OfferingTree, we have a discount code for you. Head on over to offeringtree.com/Shannon to check that out. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Tammy. It is great to have you here today.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am super excited, and I feel like I have so many questions for you because, like you said, before we hit record, you and I talked in March of 2020. And, thinking back now, your biggest questions to me at that point were, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my studio? I want to change things up. And how do I move it from the way it is now to a rental model? What is your take on what our main conversation was about back before March of 2020?
Well, I think at the time, Shannon, I went to you for business coaching because I found I was working hard. I was working a lot, but I still, in some ways, I was really happy with where my yoga studio was at. But in some ways, I felt like I was kind of at a plateau where the bulk of the work I was doing was administration and scheduling and promoting all of the classes at my studio. And I wasn't having as much time for my own personal practice, preparing for my own teaching, and for my family and any kind of life outside of being a yoga studio owner.
And so for our listeners, you have a yoga studio, a brick and mortar yoga studio in Saskatchewan that's 40 minutes away from your home.
Yes.
Well, now you're running all online classes right now, even though the government of Saskatchewan will let you do in person.
Yeah, so I became a yoga teacher about 11 years ago and started out in a hospital in a small town, teaching classes. And then slowly I expanded and moved into Prince Albert, which is a bigger city. It's about just under 40,000 people. And I was renting space to teach there. And I after a few years of doing that, I realized commercial rent is really expensive. And my husband and I were in the position to buy a building, and the perfect building came up. It's 120 years old, and it's just a perfect format for a yoga studio. So we took the leap and bought the building. And I sort of felt that was, I was trying to look for a sustainable model, because after paying commercial rent, I just felt like with a yoga studio, that's a big thing to carry. And so by buying the building, we put in an office on the studio floor of the building, a commercial office that we rent out. And then we have a residential suite on the second floor of our building. So those two streams of income, separate from the yoga studio, made it so that there wasn't as much pressure on the yoga studio financially, and I could have more fun doing what I wanted to do and not worry so much about bottom line. So that's kind of a little background on my building. So we've been here for about 6 years, and we're running on a traditional format. I had up to, I think, 6 or 7 teachers at any given time, relatively full slate of classes. I mean, we're a small studio in a small city. And I also have a contract with a rehabilitation center to provide yoga programming for women who are in recovery at this rehabilitation center and their children who join them for their rehabilitation. So that's been a really nice other sort of steady income stream to support the yoga business. It's also been tremendously fulfilling to provide that service.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. I feel like I've missed chatting with you because we had lots of chats. And in some of our conversations, I feel like we looked at all options. What would it feel like to sell the studio? What would it feel like to continue the way it is? What made you decide, okay, I'm going to switch to this rental model?
Well, the idea of the rental model really appealed to me after 6 years of sort of the administrative aspect of running a yoga studio. I love teaching yoga. I love my relationships with my students, and I felt that I wasn't giving that part the attention that it needed. When you and I talked about the idea of selling the building, part of me was like, "Oh yeah, phew, that would be a relief." But on the other hand, I've sort of created my dream here. It's a dream come true. It's a place for community, and it seemed like the right compromise to me to keep the space and keep it so that I could continue to teach, but not have all those other responsibilities. So in some ways, I'm 59 years old. I'm turning 60 this year. It felt like an opportunity to move into semi-retirement without giving up everything that I'd worked so hard to build. And it was about a 4 or 5 month period of time.
Wow. What was it like then to have that conversation with your teachers in saying, okay, now instead of me paying you per class or per student the way it was, we're going to switch now and you'll pay me? Because that's sometimes what the conversation might appear as to a yoga teacher. How did you approach that conversation and how did it go?
Yeah, it was really difficult. I actually I almost had to grieve this decision myself first before I could go to my teacher. So I would guess that well, if you and I talked in March, I had my meeting with my teachers in April. So I probably took a good month to really think about how it was going to look. I got some resources from you. So I really looked long and hard at how it was going to look. I prepared a 5-page document, sort of going through anticipating all of the questions that they might have. And then I called a meeting and I just told them the truth. I mean, I just explained that I wanted to move into semi-retirement, that I wanted more time to be a teacher and for my family, and but yet I wanted the potential for our community to continue on. I would say definitely there was shock and grief from the teachers, and then of course all of this happened right as COVID was happening. So in some ways, the whole situation has been skewed by the fact that COVID landed right about the same time that I made this decision. So in the end, out of the 6 or 7 teachers that I had teaching at the studio, 2 decided to rent from me once we were at the point where we could open again in the fall. But then when Saskatchewan's numbers started to climb and I decided that I was no longer comfortable teaching in-person classes, one of the renters felt the same way. So right now I have one teacher who rents and teaches live classes here at the studio within the provincial guidelines or rules, whatever. And then myself, where I teach from the studio, but I'm teaching strictly on Zoom.
And so how are you feeling about this overall in terms of like, how has the switch gone? And also, how are you feeling as your own yoga teacher, planning your own classes, really focusing on that and not needing to market all of these other people?
I feel great. I absolutely love it. It was a really big relief for me. I don't think I realized just how constant it was, just, the social media promotion, the emails, the glitches that teachers run into, the student inquiries, like just the fact that I'm now only dealing with, air quotes, my own students and my own classes. It's just been a massive relief for me. I can't even say. And, we also made another big change. I forgot to mention that to you, but we, when I went to the new model, the rental model, I decided I had been more of a sort of a traditional, people bought 5 or 10 class passes or unlimited passes, and they could come and go as they pleased. So I went to a registered series format for my classes, because I had decided to do that already, but with COVID, I really felt that was necessary, because that way I could set a price per class, minimum student numbers, and know that, the class was going to be worth running, sort of a thing. And so the registered series thing has also been a really positive move for me as a teacher. And the other teacher who stayed on here has gone to that format as well. And we both find that just that predictability of student numbers is so much better, and the predictability of our income. And also we feel that our students are more committed, that they're getting more out of it because they are committing. And so that's been another really positive thing for me as well.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much, that everyone benefits. That's what I think happens with a registered series, teachers, the finances, and also the students and the commitment. Thank you for sharing that. How does it work now if yoga teachers want to rent a space? Like, what do you charge them? And also, has their income changed?
If I certainly would take more renters, but it's just such an uncertain time. I definitely have space for renters right now. So I'll sort of give you for example. When we were in the traditional model, I paid my teachers between $35 and $38 a class, and then I paid a premium depending on attendance. So another dollar or two per student over 10 students. So now the rent is, for anyone who was with me before, I'm giving them a rent of $24 an hour. Regularly, it's $25 an hour. So for an hour and a quarter class, the rent would be $30. If the teacher is charging $13 a class for students, which is kind of the baseline that I've settled on, and close to what my other teacher is using, then they need about 3 students to pay the rent. And after another 2 students, they're getting pretty much to where they were as an employee. Once they're at 6 registered students, they're making $48 a class, which is more than I paid them. So my renter right now, she has 9 registered for one class. It's an hour and a half class. So her rent is $36. She charges $15 for that class. So her gross income is $135. And so she's netting $99 a class versus $38 a class.
That's amazing. That's so great to hear that. I mean, first of all, just hats off for paying a great rate to your teachers in the first place, because that's not the case at every studio. And then I love that, you're feeling this relief. How is it in terms of your income then? Because you've taken away all of the time of marketing their classes.
Well, I think because I was sort of the original person here, my classes often had more registrants than, the newer teachers coming on. So, I was often helping my teachers cultivate their clientele. So, sometimes I was only breaking even, or maybe even losing money on classes. So now, all of my effort goes into my own classes, and I know that any income I make isn't subsidizing anything else. And so, again, this is a weird year with COVID and everything. So my income's down, but COVID's playing a big part in that. But it's just a lot. I just really, I guess I think if I was a bigger studio and I could hire somebody to do administration or be a manager, but to have all those hats on, I don't think I wasn't being paid for one of my jobs, whether it was the yoga teacher job or the manager job. I wasn't being paid for one of them. So I sure feel a lot better now about sort of that I'm responsible, that any income I make, I'm responsible for that, and I see it, sort of thing. And then the rent helps keep the studio going as well.
Right. What an amazing story. Like, I love to hear the update of this. It's something that, well, when you and I spoke, I shared with you how I really saw this work at a studio that I was managing, and then someone else was managing after me. Just switching to that rental model made all the difference. Everyone was then generating more income with less headaches. Is there anything else that you can tell a yoga teacher or a yoga studio that might be listening in terms of what it was like to switch to the rental model? Any other like tips or things that you learned along the way?
Well, I think, again, I probably dragged the process out more than was necessary, but that really helped me. I sort of did it in stages. I talked to my teachers first, and I had a meeting with them, and then I gave them the 5-page written document that hopefully answered any of their questions. And I gave them 6 weeks to have first dibs on rental spots at the studio. So, then I communicated with our clientele, and again, just explained that there was going to be changes, and sort of walked the clientele through everything. And that took about a 6 to 8 week period. So that sort of took me up to the beginning of summer, and then we really scaled things down for the summer. We often do, but this year with COVID, we really did. And then we just started fresh in the fall. The one thing I had told my teachers that any existing passes, if students want to use them at their classes, I would do a 70-30 split, which is the split I do when I bring in workshops or whatever. But in the end, I just gave it all to the teachers. I just decided that we're in such strange times that quibbling over a few dollars wasn't really worth it. So I just gave it all to the teachers. And that was kind of sort of the only finicky thing, but it really was pretty darn straightforward. Whatever passes their students accessed, I just took that off their rent and we carried on. It was actually pretty easy.
So I am so curious now. You're running the rental model with the studio and all registered sessions, is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like knowing what the opposite of that is and then moving to that, how are things for you in terms of like enjoyment of life or workload?
Oh, it's just like night and day, Shannon. Like, that's the thing. It's when you and I first started working together, you'd suggested I get one of those big calendars and put it on the wall to sort of help me organize my time. And I had been, at the same time, I'd been working on a sankalpa, sort of my intention, and it was to find balance in my life. I think, that was why I went, started working with you, was to find balance in my life between work and family and gardening and housekeeping and self-care. So I got different colored stickies for all those things, those 4 areas, and I put them on my calendar. Well, I was working all the time. I mean, I was just working all the time. And now those other colors are starting to emerge. I have days for self-care. I have days for housekeeping and gardening, and I have, days for my family. And so it's just been a huge change. It wasn't sustainable the way it was before. It just wasn't sustainable.
Has anyone in your life noticed the difference then?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think my family definitely has. And my friends haven't commented, but I'm sure they have, because I just didn't have time for them at all. And, luckily my kids were grown up. When I first started teaching and doing my yoga teacher trainings, I still had kids at home, and that was a real juggling act. There's no way I could have had kids at home and been devoting as much to the studio as I was. But, and that was the other thing. I just really felt that it wasn't fair to my husband. He's been so supportive of me, but, it's been all about the studio for all these years. And so it's really nice to have that balance back.
If there's a baby step, if there like let's say there's a yoga teacher who's listening right now and they feel like they're constantly working and this idea of having more of their life back just doesn't even feel like within reach, what do you think the baby step to that is?
I think, if they're a studio owner, probably the baby step would be the registered series. And, as part of that, I got rid of unlimited passes. Those had become a real issue for me. I didn't have a lot of people who were using them, but I had people who were attending every single class on our schedule and paying, $3 a class. And again, with everything that was going on, it just didn't feel sustainable with the numbers we had and everything. So I think the registered series where sort of standing up, and, I got all this from listening to your podcasts all these years, honestly, like just saying, I'm worth $13 a class, like actually having the courage to say that my class is worth $13. It's worth more than $3 or $5. It's worth $13. And I don't think it's unreasonable for me to charge students that. And my people will find me. And, knowing who your people are and, going back to the whole idea of knowing your niche. Another thing that really helped me that you had talked about years ago in one of your podcasts was sort of the idea of what is the optimal number of students for you. I always felt just because my studio held 20 people, that if I didn't have 20 people, somehow I wasn't doing well enough. And after listening to that podcast, I thought, I really like teaching, anywhere from 7 to 14, maybe 16 at the most. And so sort of gaining clarity around what was successful for me, and more wasn't necessarily better. Sort of having that idea of numbers that felt really good for me to teach, and then having that bottom line price, and then moving to the registered series, that all kind of went together. And when we went into the first lockdown, I just carried that all with me. And I thought, even if I'm on Zoom, my classes are still worth what they're worth. I'm going to still charge $13 a class. I'm going to cap it at 16 people. Even if I'm on Zoom, I don't want more people than that. And I just had a lot of clarity around that. Really helped me, I think, having that clarity around those things.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I love all of those things that those messages helped. I mean, I feel like I had to learn those things in a very bumpy, hard way, And so this is such a good summary for someone who's feeling overwhelmed, whether you have your own home studio, which a lot of our teachers do now, especially when they can teach online, or a brick and mortar studio, or you're, a solo teacher working at a studio. Those unlimited class passes were also an issue at the studio that I worked at. Like, we thought it'd be a really nice way to treat the students who were there all of the time, but it didn't work out that way. So did you have any kickback from your students then?
Well, only from one. And it was the person who came the most, who came to every single class. But beyond that, another one of the students who always had an unlimited pass, they come now to 3 of my classes a week and one of our other teachers. So they come to 4 classes a week and they pay us $13 a class. And they don't say anything about it. And I guess, not to be insensitive, but I just feel like that's the kind of student I want, is somebody who values what I do and is prepared to pay. And now that she's coming to 3 of my classes, I have to really fight feelings of guilt about charging that. So I've given her a 10% premium, and I do yoga nidras once a month that are really popular. And so I give her one of those for free. So I try to give her something in compensation, because she's spending a lot more than she used to, and appreciating what I like. She just says, I appreciate what you're doing through COVID so much, so there was some kickback, but, I just really feel that it was more than worth it.
That's amazing. That's always the thing. Like, when we are going to make these big decisions, we think about the teachers, we think about the students, and I'm so happy to hear that this has worked out. Just thank you so much for sharing in detail all of these things. Also, what do you see now in your future as a yoga teacher? Like, do you have some big projects on the go? Do you have some workshops? I know you used to do trainings.
Yeah, well, we took our yoga teacher training online, and that's been another part of me finding more work-life balance because the yoga teacher training has been so fabulous, but so much work. We offer it as modules over 10 weekends, and so that's 10 weekends of the year that we do 18-hour modules. So we're going to wrap that up this year. So by the end of 2020, our yoga teacher training will be complete for the final time. So right now, that's sort of my extra thing that I'm doing right now. And then, in the future, I definitely have some ideas for workshops for women my age and some partnerships. I've got some relationships in the functional medicine world. And so I'm looking at a partnership with a functional medicine practitioner for providing workshops for women in midlife and on, and how to get the most out of it.
That's really exciting. So if our yoga teachers listening want to sign up for a class at your studio, what website do they go to?
They can go to yogasublimestudio.com.
Perfect. I'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes. It's been great to hear this whole update. Thank you so much for sharing this today.
Thank you, Shannon.
Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, I want to hear from you. What did you learn in today's episode with Tammy? What inspired you? What might you use for your own yoga business or your own yoga studio? Again, huge thank you goes out to Tammy. Thank you so much for really sharing this process with all of us, being up for doing that on the podcast. I know that can be a little bit scary, and I just really appreciate that you were willing to do that with our listeners so that we could all learn what a difference it made when you switched to a rental model and switched to registered sessions, what a difference it made in your life, your teachers' lives, and your students' lives, and that everyone is benefiting and winning. That's really amazing. If you are wanting to join the group program that I talked about earlier on in today's episode, if you want to dig in and have a supportive group around you, people who understand what it's like to be a yoga teacher and show up live and connect with people and talk about the struggles you're facing, along with your plan on how you would like to grow your yoga business. Our focus is going to be on growing a yoga business as well as building in self-care. So those two things together, that's what I see really needed right now with yoga teachers that I'm talking with. And I think we can do this as a group to save our yoga teachers a little bit of money. So I used to offer one-on-one consultation calls like the ones that I did with Tammy, who spoke with us today on the podcast. I'm not doing that right now because there just isn't space in my calendar, but I really am hearing from yoga teachers that you need something to support you. So I thought, let's put this together. Let's charge something like $120 over 5 or 6 months. We'll do 6 live calls together, and somehow I need to have this all together in the show notes for you when this episode goes out, and I will definitely do that. And if you have questions about this, let us know in the comments or send us a message. You can do that from our homepage or check out the show notes over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/256. Another thing, if you want to get together in person, is I'm planning on being at the Yoga Teacher Conf in Denver, Colorado, April 22nd to the 24th. And everything just got confirmed that Amanda McKinney and I will be doing an all-day intensive where we really dig into creating a very detailed plan for your yoga business. I'm excited about that because we get to be together in person and hang out for the entire weekend together. And I've never been to Denver, so I'm also really excited about traveling there. One other thing, one other way to learn with me, if you'd like to, is inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. Coming up, we have a talk February the 14th, is the hypopressive technique with Trista Zinn. This is a really amazing tool. I took a training with Trista Zinn. I've used it myself in my own body. I've helped yoga students who were dealing with pelvic organ prolapse or wanting to really work on and engage their core in a different way. So I went and took this training, and Trista is actually going to teach us this over in Pelvic Health Professionals. So if you want to check that out, go to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. One other place I'll be is right back here next week. I am going to be talking next week with two of the co-founders of OfferingTree, Alex and Eddie. And I'm really excited because I got to ask them some questions about their business that I didn't know the answer to. I asked them about the hurdles that they have faced, the vision that they had, and how that's really changed with what yoga teachers need. And I'm excited about this because they are our new sponsor. And as a podcast listener, I appreciate getting to know a company. By getting to know the founders and the people who run the company, that really makes me feel more connected to a company and lets me know, is this a good fit for me? And so I'm excited that all of you get to hear a really cool conversation that we had. So I will see you here next week. I want to give a huge shout out to our entire team for making today's episode possible. Also, a shout out of thank you to you because you are here right until the very end of the episode. And that means a lot. Your time is really valuable, and I'm thrilled that we've gotten to hang out here together today. And I also want to leave you with a question. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?